Welcome to part 9 of my building the Black Pearl Golden Edition in 2026. At a glance, you can tell I've made quite a bit of progress. I'm going to start out by just going over the details of the ship, and then I will go into more detail on how I got to this point. First, let me just escort you around the ship. Since the last episode, I have put another coat of stain, and I did achieve the darkness that I want. It is very, very dark, kind of going with the Black Pearl. However, it still has the elegance of dark wood. And my vision of this particular Black Pearl is it's at the highlight after they had discovered the gold, but the curse is not completely clear to them. You'll see the sails, when I put them up, they are going to be rotting, but the ship itself is going to be somewhat elegant. I will mention these rub rails that came with the ship, and I did substitute my own. I'll discuss that later in the video. I also added these Cannon Port frames, and I used hard maple for that. This is oak. This top rail did come with the ship. It's black walnut. I had some issues getting these to stick. I will discuss how I conquered that in the video itself. Here's the windows completed that I made myself. This is a good view of the backlight. It actually has a lot of depth, but that's the mirror reflecting this light over here. The other thing I did is closest to the ship's window, I put just a drop of black paint on the bulb itself so you don't see the element quite as clearly, but you do see it in the background one. So that was a unique thing I wish I would have thought of before and done more of. I had not mentioned before, but all the appointments, this I did in gold leaf, and that is actual like 24 karat gold leaf. It's a little pricey, not as pricey as gold on the market, but it is pretty pricey. I did get a little stain on it. I may try and wipe that off eventually. But all the appointments like that, the little statuettes and stuff, I will cover in gold. I am happy with how the mirrors turned out. I used my airbrush and just dusted the mirrors with black paint. Instead of a real clear picture, it kind of fogs it. Very happy with the windows that I made on my laser engraver instead of the brass ones. I'll probably add a little more stain on some of these. I like the mottled look. That's just a little bit too much of a contrast right there. I haven't put the railing on this frontal piece yet, so that's why it looks different than this. I will say that I did use tung oil on this. That's one coat. I also put one coat of tung oil on the top deck. The black walnut absorbed it all. You're supposed to put it on, let it sit for 5-10 minutes or so, and then wipe it off. I did wipe it off, but it all absorbed into the wood. The difference between like a polyurethane or some sort of a varnish, the tung oil absorbs into the wood and seals it. It also acts as a adhesive kind of, and it'll hold everything in together better. So that's one coat, and I will follow it up later with one more coat. You can see how doing the black edging makes the boards stand out. It looks like tar in between. I like that much better than, pencil lead or that some places recommend you use. I like the marker better. It was time consuming, took me quite a while. Here's the front view and the windows that I added. You can see that light on the interior. Again, that's where I might have considered just putting a dab of black paint on the lens of those lamps so you wouldn't see the filament, and to make it look less bright. I may do that down below. I don't want the below deck candle lights to have the same intensity of the torches on the back. That's my overview of the build so far. I hope you'll stay tuned and follow along with all the specifics on how I put all these parts together. These decorative pieces are a little tricky to get in place with any strength. What I've done, and you can see on this one, there's a little brass rod. I drilled a hole through this, then into the ship, and I tapped in a little, or you could use a nail. Whatever it is has to be small. Maybe a pin, just something to give it some extra strength. And then the instructions are not real clear on this piece that fits here. It's clear as far as the part number for this rail, but the posts, it's not very clear. And it's identified in the front of the ship, and these look identical, so it's got to be the same ones. And in the book, or in the manual, it looks like they're facing this way. They cannot, they only will fit in with the burn edges facing the sides of the ship. Looks like I could tilt this down a little better and it'd be better. So I'll tilt it down some more, and that will match up much better. And I will take a file and make it fit. There's a discrepancy on the actual parts sheet and the parts description or identification sheet. And it's in these patterns here. It's 27, 28, and 29. On this, the larger ones are 27 right there, 28, and the tiny ones are 29. This is page 12 of the instruction manual, and the details here aren't real strong, so I'm going to try and walk you through it if you're building this ship for the first time, and I think it'll be helpful. It can be a good idea to take a photograph with your camera if you can, so you can zoom in just to make sure that you're looking at what you think you're looking at. In this area right here, this E1, are real tiny little pieces. To give you an idea, it's just a little more than a rectangle than a square, and that's the spacer for these side rails. The problem you run into is this little E4 here that's pointing at something. That's really the lower rail that goes directly on the ship. So all these E's are the actual long pieces of wood. Nowhere back here does it say what you use for those vertical supports, these little things. If you go all the way down to the bottom right corner, it identifies these posts as H2. It shows them all the way around the front of the ship, but it never identifies them at the back of the ship. The next issue or trick is trying to get each one at the same height. And if you eyeball it, trust me, you'll get it wrong. I did these first two, I eyeballed them, and they're not really the same. They're a fraction off. If you want it to set properly, they need to be the same. So I'm going to make a little jig so that I'm sure that it fits correctly. What I have here is some spare little balsa wood squares. They look like they're squares. They're not really square. It's 5.22 or 23 millimeters that direction, and it's basically 5 millimeters the smaller direction. What I want is the smaller direction because it just so happens it gives me the right distance. I don't want to get any glue on this. I'm thinking, because it's black walnut, I may just use the tung oil on it and let the natural look of the wood come through just on these handrails and these posts. I'm only applying glue to the burn part of the piece of wood, and there's a little line there where the connector was. And now I'll set it on my little jig thing that I made and push down. That gives me the right height. There's no glue on those two sides, and that dark really won't matter. And I just continue on down the line. Here they are, all finished. I'll let those dry. Trying to remember that for the future. I tried drilling a real small hole through these to put a metal post in, and it wasn't working. I snapped the drill bit, broke some of them. So I am gluing them in place, and wood glue just does not work that well, and I'm struggling with the CA glue. So I am using an epoxy, and I'm hoping that it'll dry more solid. These little posts, I'm putting the posts on first, and then I'll put the railing on top of it. The epoxy that I'm using is JB Weld, and you mix these in equal parts. So I just take a little, very small dab of each one, mix it, and then I have just a few minutes to get it in place, and then it will solidify. Next time I build this ship, I'm not even going to use these little rectangular pegs that you just glue on top of that railing. I'm going to drill holes and use toothpicks because these pop off. There's just not, it's not working out. What I've done is I'm just drilling 2 holes and adding 1 support. And this is just temporarily in there. A long time ago, on one of the other videos I mentioned this, I found these at a Meijer store, and they have a unique top to them as far as the toothpicks. You can see across the way, right there is the top head of the toothpick. I'd do the same thing up top here. It seemed to be staying on. I tried a couple of different ways of getting it glued. If you bump it, it just tore it off. So you can see I added a toothpick there, and I added a toothpick there. You'll still see it, much like the little dot there, but that's fine. That gives me the stability I need so that this whole unit is secure to the ship. I also did a similar thing. I drilled a hole through this and into this decorative piece. Just some adhesive there and there. It made it too vulnerable to getting bumped and broken off. Did the same thing across the way there. I even did the same thing on these little tiny ones. And I don't know what I'll use these little loops for. They'll come in handy for a rope for something. There's a piece of black walnut that is designed to go along the side of the ship. There's a couple places. But, however, the piece they supply is just short of going all the way. If I use this, I'm going to taper the ends and just have it fit as best as possible. But I'm also considering making my own. I have these long strips of oak. I'm in the process of using my laser cutter to cut the strips. Here's one of them cut. I purposely left some of the kind of burn marks on there to make it look older. And oak does not stain as dark. I'm working on leaving it on longer and trying to decide how that's going to look. So we'll see whether I use it or not. I'm putting nails in these strips that go on the hull of the ship, and to be consistent, I made this little handy dandy jig. Measured, I went with 2 inches. This will be the first one is a 1/2 inch because this will be at the front of the ship. And then I just line up the last 2 that I drilled, take a toothpick, put it in the 2 holes. That holds everything perfectly straight. Then I just keep drilling all the little holes. And I do that because if you nail into this, it'll split the wood. I ended up just using one of the toothpicks to hold it in place. That's all I need. And then I can go down the line. It holds that end straight for me. I'm putting the final touches on this rub strip, I guess, or trim. And I just put this white board in here as a spacer so it stays the same. And I have pre-drilled the holes. This is just another drill bit. It's smaller, but it provides an opening. And then I've been putting CA glue in that hole. And tap in my decorative nail. That's it for part 9 of my Building the Black Pearl 2026 edition. This is Boiler Dan 1, and as always, thanks for watching.